Imagine walking away with $180 million in cash.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in your early 30s, right?
Yeah, you were set for life at that point.
Exactly. You've just sold a company that completely revolutionized digital payments. The game is over. You've won.
Time to buy an island.
Right? You could buy an island, disappear, and literally never work another day in your life.
Yeah.
But instead, you decide to risk every single penny on two industries you have absolutely zero experience in.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. Launching orbital rockets and building electric cars, and you do it until you are literally borrowing money just to pay your rent.
Yeah.
So today, we're decoding the architect of that exact scenario. Welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive. We are unpacking a source document today titled The Architect of Tomorrow, The Life of Elon Musk. But we aren't just reciting a biography here.
No, definitely not.
We want to decode the operating system of a brain that doesn't just enter global industries, but completely dismantles and rebuilds them.
And, just to be clear up front, the source material does get into some highly polarizing territory.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it covers everything from his engineering triumphs to his highly controversial takeover of Twitter, the ensuing workplace culture clashes, and his very public political friction. So I need to state this clearly. Our goal today isn't to litigate those politics or take any kind of side left or right. We are not doing that.
Right.
We are impartially looking under the hood at the raw mechanics of his choices, straight from the text, to understand how this specific mindset operates.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand that mindset, you really have to look at the foundational code, which was written in Pretoria, South Africa.
Yeah, born in 1971.
Right, 1971. And you look at his parents, an engineer father and a dietitian model mother, and you see this environment of intense extremes. But what the source really highlights is, well, his isolation as a kid.
He was very much in his own world.
Exactly. He wasn't just, reading science fiction and encyclopedias. He was absorbing systems. By 10, he's teaching himself programming.
Which was not easy back then.
No, not at all. And here is the kicker. By 12, he doesn't just write a space shooter video game called Blastar. He actually sells the code to a magazine for $500.
What's fascinating here is that this is the crucial differentiator, right? A lot of bright kids learned to code in the early 80s,
Yeah.
but very few figured out how to commercialize it at age 12. It establishes early on that he viewed technology not just as a toy, but as a lever.
A lever for what? Exactly.
Well, a tool for creating value. And he quickly realized that if he wanted the longest lever possible, he needed to be where the fulcrum was. For him, that meant North America.
Right. He sees the U.S. as the absolute epicenter of the tech world. So at 17, he moves to Canada, goes to Queen's University, and then he transfers to the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And the degrees he walks away with are basically the ultimate cheat code for what he's about to do. He gets a dual degree in physics and economics.
It really is the perfect dual lens for reality, if you think about it. Well, physics teaches you what is materially possible in the universe. It strips away human assumption. And then economics teaches you how to allocate capital to make that physical possibility scale.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Right. If you can understand the fundamental laws of mass and energy, and you can understand the fundamental laws of supply and demand, you can build almost anything.
Which makes his next move so fascinating. So he graduates, gets accepted into a PhD program at Stanford in material science, and he dropped out after exactly 2 days.
2 days.
2 days. It's like spending years training for the Olympics, standing on the starting blocks, and then just walking out of the stadium because you realize the real race is happening out in the parking lot.
That is a great way to put it.
The internet boom was happening, and academia was just, too slow for him.
He saw a massive inefficiency and just couldn't sit in a classroom while the world was being rewritten. So in 1995, he and his brother Kimball start Zip2, which essentially helped newspapers put directories online. And this is where we see the physical manifestation of his work ethic.
Yeah, the source goes into some crazy detail here.
It really does.
Yeah.
It details how they basically lived in the office. He slept on a futon under his desk, showered at the local YMCA, and essentially coded around the clock.
It set his baseline for pain tolerance, honestly.
Yeah.
And that absolute immersion pays off. In 1999, Compaq buys Zip2 for over $300 billion, and he nets around $22 million.
And what would you do with $22 million?
I mean, I'd be on a beach.
Right. But instead of exhaling, he immediately pivots. He rolls almost all of it into an online bank called X.com, which eventually merges into PayPal.
Right, because they figure out the physics of moving money securely over the internet.
Exactly.
And in 2002, eBay buys PayPal for $1.5 billion. After taxes, he walks away with roughly $180 million.
Now, this is where the narrative splits from every other Silicon Valley success story.
Yeah, it really takes a turn.
He had mastered the physics of moving digital money, but he realized the ultimate bottlenecks for humanity weren't digital, they were physical.
Physical bottlenecks.
Right. Moving electrons on a screen is one thing. Moving mass through the atmosphere or changing how a global energy grid operates, that requires a completely different tolerance for risk.
I want to dig into that software to hardware transition because it's brutal. I mean, going from software to aerospace is like a video game developer deciding to build a real-life roller coaster.
That's a terrifying thought.
Right. In code, a bug means a user gets a 404 error page, you write a patch, you push an update, no big deal. In aerospace, a bug means a $100 million explosion and a massive crater in the ground.
Exactly.
The feedback loop is terrifying. So he takes his PayPal fortune, and instead of safe index funds, he pours it into SpaceX in 2002. His goal is to make humanity multiplanetary, and the entire aerospace industry just laughed at him.
Oh, they laughed because the economic model of space travel was totally broken at the time. For decades, space was dominated by government cost plus contracting. A contractor builds a rocket, the government pays for all the costs, plus a guaranteed profit margin.
So there's no reason to make it cheaper.
Zero incentive. The rockets were designed to be used once and thrown away in the ocean. Imagine if you bought a Boeing 747, flew it from New York to London once, and then threw it in the Atlantic.
A ticket would cost millions of dollars.
Exactly, and that was the state of space travel.
Which brings us to his physics degree and this idea of first principles thinking. The source spends a lot of time on this. Instead of asking, how do we build a rocket based on how Boeing builds a rocket, he asked, what is a rocket actually made of?
Yes. He looked at the commodity markets, aerospace-grade aluminum, titanium, copper, carbon fiber. He calculated the raw material cost and realized it was about 2% of the typical price of a rocket.
That is insane, 2%.
The other 98% was just an incredibly inefficient manufacturing process. So SpaceX's entire mission became vertical integration. Instead of buying a radio from a subcontractor for $50,000, they would just figure out how to build it in-house for $5,000.
And while he's fighting this massive uphill battle against gravity and government monopolies, he decides to simultaneously take on the global auto industry.
Because why not?
Right, why not? He becomes the largest investor and eventually CEO of Tesla. And you have to remember, at the time, this is the early 2000s, the legacy automakers thought electric cars were a joke.
They really did.
They were basically glorified golf carts. Heavy, slow, with terrible range. Nobody wanted them.
Because legacy auto was constrained by the assumption that car batteries had to be heavy lead acid or nickel metal hydride.
Right, the old tech.
But Tesla looked at a completely different curve. Laptops and consumer electronics, lithium-ion batteries were getting later, cheaper, and more energy-dense every single year.
They were following Moore's law, kind of.
Exactly. Tesla didn't invent a magical new battery. They just strung thousands of standard, commercially available lithium-ion cells together, wrote incredible software to manage their temperature, and put it in a sports car.
The Roadster.
Right. The Roadster proved that an EV didn't have to be a compromise. It could actually be faster and better than a gas car.
Okay, actually, wait, I want to push back on something here. One of the main lessons the source tries to impart is this idea of relentless hard work as the key driver.
Okay.
But is it really just about working harder? I mean, working 100 hours a week doesn't automatically mean you can build a reusable orbital rocket or a mass-market electric car. Isn't this actually about a level of almost reckless risk tolerance that a normal, rational person would avoid?
It's a very fair pushback. Hard work is the engine, sure, but risk tolerance is the steering wheel.
Yeah.
He wasn't just building companies for profit. He was trying to solve massive human bottlenecks. He believed humanity was vulnerable if confined to one planet, so he felt he needed to make space travel cheap.
The multiplanetary thing.
Right. He believed fossil fuels were a dead end, so he needed to force the transition to sustainable energy. When your goals are that existential, the conventional risk calculus just breaks down.
Because the goal is bigger than the money.
Exactly. He was willing to risk personal ruin because he viewed the alternative, which is stagnation in those industries, as completely unacceptable.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that risk of personal ruin became terrifyingly real.
Oh, yeah.
By 2008, this entire house of cards was collapsing. The physics of hardware finally caught up with him. The first 3 SpaceX Falcon 1 rockets failed to reach orbit.
Just brutal failures.
You have these cascading failures, fuel sloshing in the tanks, staging separation timing being off by just milliseconds. And each explosion literally burns through millions of dollars. And at the exact same time, Tesla is bleeding cash trying to get the Roadster into production.
And we have to layer on the macroeconomic environment here.
Right, it's 2008.
It is the fall of 2008. The global financial system is literally melting down. Lehman Brothers collapses. Credit markets freeze overnight.
Nobody is lending money to anyone.
Nobody. So even if you have a great idea, there is absolutely zero investment capital available. It is objectively the worst possible time in modern history to be running 2 cash-burning, experimental hardware startups.
The text notes he was living off personal loans from friends just to pay his own rent.
Think about that.
The emotional weight of that is just staggering. You go from having $180 million to staring into the abyss of total public failure. You are one bad day away from being a punchline. You know, the dot-com millionaire who thought he was a rocket scientist and lost every penny.
Yeah.
Everything came down to September 2008. He scraped together the absolute last of his funds, enough for one final Falcon 1 launch, a 4th attempt.
And if it fails, SpaceX is dead.
Done.
And Tesla likely follows suit because his reputation as a visionary is completely destroyed. Nobody would fund him.
But it doesn't fail.
No, it doesn't.
The 4th launch achieves orbit. It is the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket to ever do so. And almost immediately, NASA awards SpaceX a $1.5 billion commercial resupply services contract to fly cargo to the International Space Station.
That contract literally saves the company.
Literally. Concurrently, Tesla manages to secure just enough bridge financing on Christmas Eve of 2008 to stave off bankruptcy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, surviving that crucible is the defining moment of his career.
How do you mean?
Well, when you go right to the edge of the cliff, when you bet everything on a single engineering test and win, it fundamentally alters your psychology.
Oh, I'm sure.
It seemed to harden his belief that physics and extreme engineering could solve absolutely any crisis, no matter how dire the situation looked.
And you could see that hardened confidence play out over the next decade. SpaceX figures out how to land orbital boosters backward on drone ships in the middle of the ocean, making rockets reusable.
Which is still mind-blowing to watch.
It really is like science fiction. And Tesla scales from the Roadster to the Model S, 3, X, and Y, basically forcing every major legacy automaker to pivot to electric. And with those industries shifting, his vision starts to fracture outward into entirely new, seemingly disconnected fields.
Disconnected on the surface, yes. But they all share a common denominator. They are all bandwidth problems.
Okay, bandwidth problems. How so?
Take Neuralink, which he co-founded. They are developing implantable brain-computer interfaces. Why? Because human output is currently bottlenecked by the speed at which our thumbs can type on a phone.
Oh, interesting.
He views that as a biological bandwidth issue. Then you have the Boring Company building underground tunnels. He looks at traffic in Los Angeles and sees a 2D physical bandwidth problem. Too many cars, not enough surface area.
So the solution is 3D tunnels.
Exactly. And he's heavily invested in artificial intelligence, warning about its existential risks, but also driving its development, which is essentially computational bandwidth.
So what does this all mean? Which brings us to the most controversial bandwidth problem of all, the 2022 acquisition of Twitter, which he rebranded to X.
Right.
You look at that move, and as a listener, you really have to wonder how one human context switches like that. Just imagine your day. In the morning, you're reviewing literal brain surgery technology for Neuralink.
Yeah.
At lunch, you were looking at the soil mechanics of an underground tunnel. And by the afternoon, you are tearing down the content moderation algorithms of a global social media platform.
But that context switching comes with a staggering amount of friction.
Oh, absolutely.
This raises an important question, and the source is very clear about this duality. The exact same rigid, uncompromising first principles thinking that allows someone to look at a disposable rocket and say, no, we're going to make it land itself.
Right.
That is the exact same trait that generates immense chaos when applied to human systems.
Because first principles don't really care about human feelings or, HR policies.
Precisely. The text details the widespread criticism of his management style, the combative workplace cultures, his polarizing public statements, and the volatile political and business decisions at X.
It's been a very bumpy ride.
To say the least, first principles engineering assumes that if a system is inefficient, you tear it down to the studs and rebuild it. But when you tear down social networks or workplace norms, you aren't dealing with titanium and aluminum.
No.
You are dealing with human psychology, culture, and politics. You cannot separate the visionary from the disruptor. It is a package deal. The relentless drive that pushes physics to its absolute limits is the exact same drive that creates highly volatile public personas and wildly fluctuating net worths tied to the daily whims of the stock market.
The disruption isn't a side effect, it's the primary mechanism.
Yes.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, there are a few core takeaways that you can extract and apply to your own life, whether you're running a startup or just navigating a tough project at work. First, embrace failure as data. A rocket explosion isn't a defeat, it's a telemetry gathering event. Second, tackle the actual bottlenecks, not just the symptoms. And third, raw persistence often overrides pure talent. Success at the highest levels rarely comes without surviving a near-fatal setback.
Those are incredibly practical lessons. But looking at the entirety of his trajectory, there is a final concept worth exploring that the text points toward but leaves sort of unanswered.
Oh, what's that?
He has spent his entire life solving concrete mathematical problems.
Yeah.
Battery density, rocket thrust, orbital mechanics, tunnel physics. He views all of these as engineering challenges required to save humanity.
Right, very quantifiable things.
Exactly. But considering his recent immersion into global social media, algorithmic town squares, and AI policy, his ultimate legacy might not be defined by the physics of machines at all.
Interesting.
It might be defined by his ability to navigate the messy, unquantifiable nature of humans themselves. When you are trying to architect the future, at what point does human behavior become the hardest engineering problem of all?
Man, that is a phenomenal question to chew on. You can calculate the exact trajectory of a rocket to Mars down to the millimeter, but predicting how a million people will react to a change in a social media algorithm,
Completely different ballgame.
that requires a completely different kind of math. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We love pulling apart these complex sources with you. Keep questioning the bottlenecks in your own life, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.